The company, and I'd been asked to take over running this small company in January of 76 due to some internal political mishigas, as we'd say. And by the mid-'80s, we'd grown to over 110 professionals, most of whom had PhDs. We were a well-established company. We had been approached and had sold us to join with Yankelovich, Skelly & White, at the time the premier market research company in the world, based in New York City. And then the company that owned them and us sold us to the Sachis, and then I was on the board of that. And by 1985, I was really fed up. I wasn't having enough time to do any research, which in the past, more often than not, I had to do on my own time anyway. So that's when I looked around, and a whole bunch of my colleagues from MIT and Harvard days had gotten faculty positions at Case Western Reserve University, which in the School of Management, the Organizational Behavior Department was famous as one of the few places that studied change. And they offered me a tenured position. So my son was already at university, and my wife and I decided, okay, that's it. So I gave up running the companies, and we moved to Cleveland, and I became a professor in April of 1987, and I've loved it since. Continuing to study how do people change. But because of my background in doing the work, I was very committed to an empirical approach where I thought there was enough concepts or theories. What we had to do was test whether or not people changed. And if they didn't, we shouldn't use that approach. And here I'd been doing psychotherapy, and our program had dropped the recidivism rate 15 to 20%. But still, I mean, even the whole field of psychotherapy had very poor results for the amount of money spent on it. So I continued to study at first, how do we help 25 to 55-year-olds develop the competencies that we now have plenty of data say predict effectiveness in leadership and management and certain professions. And that's what we were doing. And by 2014, we had published 39 longitudinal studies. We had pretty convincing evidence that we were able to help these 25 to 55-year-olds improve their emotional and social intelligence behavior by 60-some%, 1 to 2 years after the course. But it drops off, but at 5 to 7 years out, it held at a 50% improvement. And this was compared to basically zero from leadership training in industry and government, and less than zero in management education, MBAs and all that. So, meanwhile, I had started as a part of just trying to earn money. I'd started working with organizational change back in 1970, wrote a paper on that, and had gotten into team change. And then around 2000, started focusing back on to helping relationships, looking at the dyad, and coaching was a good place to look at it, because everybody who's a manager, parent, leader, helper, whatever, is trying to help people change, at least to motivate them to adapt. Well, what better place to study it than when you have a relationship specifically focused on, somebody changing in some way. So that led to a whole bunch of the coach-client research, which included a whole series of fMRI studies. So I got heavily into the neuroscience, starting around 2006.